Hello, friends. It is, well, it doesn't really matter, does it? It's still October, but I'm really excited to introduce the second episode of the KT Time with insert name here. But in this episode, I will be having a discussion with one of my best friends and who I've known for years, named Paulina. And I think I'm just going to leave it at that. We talk about social unrest, kind of her college experience as she had a transition to online classes immediately. We kind of dab into the Asian American experience, East Asian experience in America, um, and ways that we can keep researching and learning and supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. And so there's a whole lot more that we talk about, but that's just kind of like a brief intro. And so I hope you guys enjoy it. And again, if you have any questions or topics that you want me to ask people in the future, feel free to comment below. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this really long talk. Hey, so I just realized while editing that I forgot to tell you that my mic refused to be compatible with Zoom. So there is like a subtle change in the audio quality. Hopefully it's still okay. Like I've listened to it, it sounds fine to me, but you will hear a difference. So yeah, just letting you know. Okay, gonna drink my coffee. Let's see. Hello, YouTube people. I am very excited to introduce my little sister. You can tell by the resemblance. That's a joke. My lovely Paulina.
Hi.
And as you can tell, we are still social distancing. That's a thing. Please continue to wear masks. And let's
Please.
see. So, Paulina and I met back in 2012, I
Yeah.
want to say, and we are definitely not 14 and 16 anymore. So it's been a long journey. But Paulina, why don't you tell us about yourself? They don't know that but you are like a recent college graduate, and
I am.
you went through the process of having to go to online learning and try start your post college career during the pandemic. So feel free to tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so thank you. Katie said, I recently graduated college. I graduated in May, and my school had been online since about mid-March, early March, and then we were let go from school like mid-March, and so I was able to come home and live with my family. And since then, just applying to jobs during this kind of very strange time and doing a lot of interviewing and with all the social unrest stuff to really trying to get engaged with different movements and then also educating myself on a lot of different topics.
Let's see. And I'm just gonna ask, are you talking about like BLM and that kind of
Yes,
stuff?
yeah.
Okay.
Black Lives Matter, as well as now into October with all the elections as well. So lots of stuff going on.
A lot.
And yeah, I'm happy to say I was out in California for a while. So with all the issues with the fires and climate change too, that was always a big topic.
Mm. I feel like this climate change can never be like talked about enough these days.
No, no, I can't. I think especially in areas that are hard hit, which I think tend to be the coast, but obviously we saw a lot of issues going on in the Midwest and Iowa as well. So it's not concentrated in any specific area.
I'm curious. So were you already at home when all the fires started, or is it just like summer is kind of like wildfire season in California?
So I would say that fire season's generally, from my experience, been the latter half of the year. So in the fall and then also in the spring. Summers, they also occur. They're kind of year round. It depends on how dry the season has been. But I this time was already back home and then left California by the time the fires hit this time around, and it was just it's always really scary to see, especially um, I was going to school in one of those hot areas,
Oh man.
so throughout my 4 years there, I was also quite acquainted with having wildfires and um, the very serious consequences that that has in terms of, you know, what that means people can or cannot access during fires and having to move their lives, and even people who don't have to do that, the emotional stress that comes along with that.
Hmm. So do you know people who are still in California and just had to deal with that part of
I
the
do,
disaster?
yeah. And it's, you know, every year it gets worse and worse. So a lot of the people that I know in California grew up there. So they're like somewhat more used to it, but still, like I said, it gets worse every single year. So they are still dealing with something new every time.
Mm, that's horrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah, just gonna say it. That's horrifying.
Yeah, like I when the coronavirus first started to hit hard in California, it was such a sad moment when I realized I was like, oh, this is great. I already have N95 masks. And I had already had N95 masks because of how over the years having needed N95 masks for wildfires
Oh my
in
gosh.
California. And I was like, oh, this is such a sad moment. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Let's see. So I won't ask like where you went to school, but would you be
Mhm.
comfortable sharing like what you studied?
Yeah, I studied media studies, journalism, communications, and I also got a minor in public policy.
So you're just like judging me right now.
No, no. I'm in no place to judge. I'm in no place to judge. I feel like communications and media studies is at the butt of so many jokes. And also, you know, I studied music for many years too, and it's still very important to me. So, if anything, I have a lot of respect for people who continue studying that, and go into it as a profession. So, I'm surrounded by many, many musicians and absolutely love being in that sphere with them.
I feel like I saw like a recent video on Facebook and you were playing in like a was it a mini orchestra or
Oh yeah.
something?
Yeah, there was I really loved being home and getting to get involved with the music playing here. There it was a relatively last minute project that got put together, and I'm good friends with another musician who was playing and then also knew the one of the co-directors. And so when they were like, "Oh my gosh, you're home. Have you been practicing? Have you been playing in the last 4 years?" And I was like, "I mean, yes, but not, you know, not formally." And they're like, "Well, can you still read music, basically?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm good. Like, I can do it." So,
It's like, hey, you see this
um,
wooden block thing? Do you know how to hold it still?
yeah. So I think it was really fun to have the opportunity. It was socially distanced and such. So it was really really nice to get back into the music scene, even for a little bit of time.
Let's see. So I feel like that brings me to another like question I didn't even think of until now.
Mhm.
But I okay, this might sound weird, but I feel like something a lot of people talk about or know about like us Asians is that we
Mhm.
play an instrument and
Mhm.
a lot of us go to school for it. But what is it like when because it was a big part of like your childhood, I feel like, right?
Mhm.
So what is
Yeah.
it like when you go study something else and then the instrument just kind of has to become more secondary? Like, does it become like
Mhm.
more of like a, I don't know, like therapy, something just for enjoyment? Has that changed your perception of it?
Yeah, so it for a time in high school, I had thought about potentially minoring in music because it was such a big part of my life growing up, and I did genuinely really love violin in my case, and so I wanted to continue doing that. But at the same time, I didn't feel like I had the time, and I ended up not being able to do it anyways, even if I, you know, tried to revamp my schedule, because just my major courses and the things I need to do for journalism would inevitably clash time wise, so it just didn't work. But for me, it was kind of sad to let it go. And I remember my the first concert that I attended in college,
Hmm.
I actually cried the first the first time because I missed it so much. I didn't realize how much I missed it. And so for me, violin had always been something that I would practice, not as much as I did before college, obviously, but I would continue practicing more of for therapy and for just trying to get out of whatever mindset I was in, whatever rut that I was in schoolwork wise. You know, I would try to make time for violin just to one keep things working,
Oh yes.
but two also just being able to have some kind of escape. And so for me, it was very valuable that way. And I, try to stay involved in arts as much as I can.
Awesome. Let's see. So, like I've mentioned 5 million times, I've known you for a while. And so you've always seemed to be someone with like many different interests. And I feel like back when you were actually picking your college, we didn't really talk that often. So, like, at what point did you choose like your degree for college
hmm
and what drew you to
So
it?
yeah, I went into college with a different idea than of what I was going to do with college than I ended up doing. So
Like
I
many
went in,
people.
yeah. So I actually went in, probably very stereotypically as a pre med student,
That's what I
and
remember. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
and I that was part of how I chose my college. Not 100%. I chose my college for different reasons too, but they were also just a very strong school for that. And after my first semester, I had, mostly STEM courses, and I was just so drained.
Mm,
Honestly, I wasn't doing music. I in high school it was also very heavily in worked in journalism, and so I always had some kind of creative outlet for myself. And my first year of college, I didn't have that, and I didn't realize how big of a deal it would be for me not having one or the other. And I personally didn't feel like I had what it took to have a career in music or have the career that I would want in music. And so I never considered going down that professionally,
mm,
at least. And so I knew that I needed something else to make up for it. And so I ended up doing media studies, which was as close to journalism as I could get at my university. And so I studied that and kind of shaped it to be centered around journalism.
mm.
And so that's ended up how I chose my major and how I got into what I'm doing now. Is just those were my two passions before going into college, and those were two things that I missed very deeply. Music was just something that I didn't feel like I could go into professionally and
Mm.
be the level that I wanted to be. So I decided to go with something else.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing
Mm.
that. So let's talk about media studies more, little sis.
Yeah.
So, as everybody and their mom says these days, we are living in very unprecedented times. So,
hmm
how has the transition been as you are like applying to jobs and trying to figure out what the heck to do as a grown up?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's I think a challenging point in time for anybody, regardless of what else is going on in the world. So I think right now it's even stranger. I think the hardest thing that I've dealt with personally is applying to jobs, and that's already a stressful situation. But whenever the job market is what it is right now, and it's slowly pulling itself out for some industries, at least it's slowly pulling itself out, but not so much for everybody. And I think with journalism, it's already a smaller industry that's notorious for being difficult to break into.
Mm,
And so for me it was very challenging mentally, and then also having the stamina to keep sending out applications and resumes and keep networking to get into that. And so I'm still continuing that. I do work on the side with a lot of social media strategy for smaller businesses, so I still do that, but
awesome.
I still have my eye out on different opportunities. And it is challenging to try to grab spots that people who are much more experienced than I am are trying to grab too, because whether they were freelancers or they were laid off from their full time work, they need that too. So everybody's
Yeah.
going for very few spots, and I think that can be said across any industry right now.
I agree. I think like
Mm-hmm.
with orchestras especially, I feel really bad for like the freshmen right now and like people just starting
Mm-hmm.
college, at least for like music, because they were like, are there even going to be orchestras by the time I finish? And I'm like, I have to hope so,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. I have a lot of sympathy for those, particularly freshmen and seniors this year. Yeah, I don't know how they're doing it. A good friend of mine teaches violin and at a university, and she has a freshman, and I don't know how they're doing it. I imagine it must be so challenging because so much of music, we're used to doing that in person and having that connection, um, and I think it's much more challenging to do like this.
I agree, especially when like even in interviews such as this, sometimes the sound will lag. So just imagine that with trying to
with
play
music,
something.
trying to play it at the same time.
Yeah, just sing us something and they can like get an idea of what it's like.
No, good try.
You always gotta try. Trying to think of another question. I had a brain fart, guys. Let's see. So obviously like applying to jobs is a full-time job in itself.
Mhm.
And I remember it's very stressful. I don't have to do it right now because I'm in graduate school. But
Mhm.
what are some ways that you, I don't know, like self-care, make sure you're taking care of yourself and not, because I feel like it's so easy right now to just like turn on the news, go on Facebook and let everything kind of like overwhelm you.
Mhm. For me, music.
Hmm.
I've haven't gotten to practice like this since high school, so it's that's really fun. But also having the right people by you, whether that's physically near you or like this virtually, having I will say I am very grateful to have gotten the opportunity to reconnect with a lot of people that I normally wouldn't necessarily have as much time for.
Mm.
Not out of not wanting to talk to them, but just with work and school and all of that. Now I think the definitions of like work time and personal time is so blurred
Oh my gosh, I
that
know.
I do feel like I was able to connect with a lot more people that I hadn't gotten to in a while. So having a very good support network of people who keep me motivated. Honestly, it's hard whenever you don't get to. I consider myself an introvert, but I still miss human
Humans.
connection. Yeah, I still miss being near people. And I'm not much of a hugger, but I've been missing hugs, which is so strange to me because I'm not. You know this. I'm not a hugger,
Yeah, I was like,
so
whoa,
it's
Paulina
such
misses
it's
hugs.
it's such a strange feeling. But having really incredible people by me to keep me motivated, like, no, you are really good. Searching for a job is really hard, and not hearing back from people is something that everybody has to go through, and it's not necessarily a reflection of how you are and what your worth is. And so um, my parents have always been very supportive of me. I was nervous about going into media studies when
Mm,
I did because my parents were always supportive and do whatever I wanted to do, but I do think it's inevitable for parents to kind of worry sometimes,
mm-hmm.
even if it's silent and they keep it to themselves, to worry a little bit about what kind of opportunities would be available for their children. And so going from pre-med, that's relatively stable if you can get through it and get to medical school and all of that, relatively stable, to going into journalism was a big jump for them. But they've always been very supportive, and they continue to be. They continue to be like, no, if that's what you want to do, then keep going for it.
No, that's
And
amazing.
yeah, and I was also a little discouraged with the job market being what it is, and had honestly thought about ways that I can use my journalism background to potentially do other things.
Mm-hmm.
And they were equally supportive of that too. They're like, oh, no, your skills are actually very transferable, and as long as you're finding something that you enjoy and that's helping you grow, and then that's more important. So they have not, luckily, they have not rushed me on accepting job offers or anything like, or like getting out of the house. So I appreciate that a lot.
Let's see. So if you, what are exactly are like, is your dream job, or is there even one right now?
I don't know. I don't know. I for a long time, I wanted to stay in like network television, do like the digital side of that. But I don't know, recently I have found that, my joy comes less from what exactly I am doing and more from um, being able to be engaged with digital media. That's what I enjoy, working with digital media, social media. And so being able to work in that sphere and continue to be innovating with what technologies come our way, what social platforms come our way. I think that's more
Mm.
important to me, and the mission of whatever organization or company that I'm in. Those that I found are more important to me than what exactly is the work that overall it's supposed to do. And so, if that makes sense, so I've found that that's allowed me to kind of broaden my scope of what I want to do, and it's opened a lot more avenues. Honestly, at first I was very set on doing sports journalism, and then it kind of gradually moved out to news, and now it's gradually grown out to, well, actually, I'd be really happy to do social media for, whether it's nonprofit or for corporations or stuff like that. I think I've personally broadened my own scope, and I'm still trying to figure out what what I want,
Mm.
because for better or for worse, I am not short of any interests.
I don't think that's a bad thing, especially during the crazy times like this where things are changing so quickly.
Yeah,
And I feel like it does make you like way more marketable since you are open to different avenues.
I hope so.
I'm just
I'm
sitting
trying.
here. I'm like, why aren't they hiring you? You're amazing.
Oh, thank you. No, I yeah, I try to just remember, the right. If it's the right opportunity, it will come and it will work out, whether or not it quote unquote should. So, I'm just trying to remind myself of that, and to not get lazy and not just sit around and do nothing, but to still work on those skills, even if it's not something that I can do for a major company right now. So the work that I've been doing has more been smaller work for small businesses and such. So, trying to stay motivated and
uh,
just not get lazy.
are you like a checklist kind of person where you make a to-do list every day and then after each thing you're like, yay?
um, I want to be, but no, I'm not. I I will make checklists, and I find them very useful when I'm stressed out. But I'm usually not stressed out every single day. So
That's good.
yeah, no, it's great. It's great, but so basically I only use them when I'm really stressed out. That helps me. Otherwise, day to day, I just like, I can do that tomorrow.
Okay,
So
so we might
there,
see a little trickle down effect, and then a couple of months later, crap. Okay, I'm
exactly.
making
And
a
so yeah,
list.
exactly. Yeah. So
Sorry, I done that too. Or my thing is, I make a to-do list, or I get an agenda, I fill it out for the week, and then I never open it again until the next week, and I'm like, oh, well, it's fine.
I don't know. In school, I had to have my agenda. And if something was not in there, it would not get done because I would forget about it. And so when I was in school, I didn't necessarily need checklists, but I did need my agenda. And I still to this day, I really like handwriting things,
Mm.
but I also need to have my digital version, my calendar all set up. And so especially that last year of college, man, when senioritis hits. And, sometimes I wasn't quite as good about making sure whatever I wrote down got into the calendar and vice versa. So there'd be a couple times where I'd be like, oh my God, like I totally forgot something until last minute. So I don't know. I'm starting to get better about that.
Doing the
Now
eyebrow
that
raise. Mm.
Yeah, well, because now I have more things to do slowly, and so I'm slowly starting to get back into um a schedule for myself. Yeah, so
Would you say that during this whole like crazy time, having patience is like really important just for anybody?
oh yeah, oh yeah, and it's hard. It's really hard to be patient, and it's hard to stay patient when I think whether it's job related or not, I feel like we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, mostly from social, like what we think our worth is based off of whether we are employed or whether we're in school or how well we're doing. um and so it's really hard to stay patient and to stay focused whenever you have all of that working on you. And luckily I have a very supportive environment where people aren't pushing me to do anything, but I know that that's not the case for a lot of people. So
Mm.
having external stress to that too, it's hard to stay patient, because you want to get out of whatever rut that you're in. And that is hard, but
Mm.
I think it's important. I think it's necessary, and that's so much easier to say than it is to do.
Do you have any like advice or tips for people who might be in that situation where they're being pressured externally to try to just get moving faster.
Yeah. I think that's so up to how each person is and how they handle things.
Hmm.
For me, it's been so much from the comfort of the people around me and having a strong inner circle of family that have become friends and friends that have become family. Those people to really kind of ground me. And for me, I tend to need some assurance. I think everybody does, but I found that their assurance and non-judgment have been really important to me making sure that I can stay focused and take care of
Hmm.
myself emotionally. So that's worked for me, but I think it so depends on how each person processes things for themselves.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Yeah,
Hmm.
I feel like the one thing we've all been gifted is time to get to know ourselves and see how we
Hmm.
react to these situations. Like I
Yeah.
do feel like it's like so much stuff has been happening in 6 months.
Yeah. 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 I cannot believe it's October.
I know. Quarantine started in what, March? April, May,
Hmm.
June, July. So 7 months. Excuse me.
Yeah. It's been like 7 months. Arkansas technically didn't shut down until months later. So,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and like it's weird. I've been checking back in Wisconsin where I used to live, and like I
Hmm.
think they're like number one for COVID spikes.
Oh,
And I'm just
gosh.
like, what are you guys doing? I don't understand.
Yeah. I mean, it's so state by state too. Like, yeah, some states shut down a lot faster. California, for example, shut down very quick. They basically imposed, at least the city that I was in, they basically imposed um, lockdown, or like not complete lockdown, but that like I same concept. They basically started that the day that I left. So I was like, okay, I gotta get out. And it was so weird because my home did not take that seriously until like a month later. And so I felt like I was leaving a ghost town and coming back to like what was, the real world. And I was like, this is so weird. Because one
Uh,
was kind of post apocalyptic and the other one was like, oh, nothing's going on. Oh, you don't need to be worried about that.
so
Until about a month
crazy.
later. And I was like, oh, just kidding. This is kind of big. And I'm like, yeah, it is.
Man, I'm trying to picture that saying like ghost town versus everything's fine. Okay.
Hmm. It was so strange. So strange. And it changed quickly too. At least in my community, I was picking up a friend from the airport about a week and a half, 2 weeks after I got back, and completely different approach to things. The airport was like, "Oh, if you're not getting on the plane, you don't come in." Like, versus when I flew back in, it was like nothing was going on, and then 2 weeks later, they're like, "Oh wait, no, yeah, no, don't come in. If you're not getting on the plane, you need to stay outside." So I was like, "Oh, okay, all right." So slowly, but also very, I don't know. I want to say slowly, but at the same time, it went from like 0 to 100 really quickly.
Mm.
So I don't know if you consider that super quick or super fast, because I feel like it was a weird mix of both.
Yeah, seems like different depending on the business, depending on what it is.
Hmm.
Reacted quickly, and then other
Hmm.
places would be like, "Oh, it's totally fine. You don't have to worry."
Yeah, because it wasn't gradual. So in that case, it was very fast. But the time it took, we were 0 for so long, and then 100. It took longer than it should have to get to 100. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Yeah. So at least that was my community. At least I don't know.
Wow. You could just make like a short film about the two differences.
Oh yeah, I'm actually really interested to see what kind of art is going to continue coming out of it. Obviously, we see it already, but I'm really curious to see all the art that's going to come out of this entire situation. Because there's time, so the people who are creative and have the talents for it, I think, are going to have just some really impeccable work come out. So I'm hoping that that's a positive out of the situation.
Mm.
And I'm going to be really interested to see what comes out of it.
I feel like I saw like a preview for a new like thriller movie that's entirely based on
Mm.
like Zoom. So the main character
Oh,
will be
really?
talking to each other, and that's going to be like the environment. which seems really
Oh
cool. But
wow.
also, like, I don't know if I want to watch that.
Yeah, that might be too real.
Yeah, you know. Hmm.
I don't know, but it maybe. I don't know. I don't know if you ever watched the movie Contagion. But I
I
had to
don't think
watch
so.
that. I had to watch that in high school. My biology teacher had us watch it to learn about, viruses
Oh
and
boy.
sickness. And when all of this hit, I was like, oh my God. Not to get like all dramatic, but like this is probably the closest I've personally witnessed because, SARS was a big deal in Asia, but I wasn't in Asia. I obviously had family living there, so I remember the effects that it had on my family, but I didn't live in Asia, so I didn't have to go through what it felt like living in that kind of situation. But I know, this is still unprecedented. But I think for a lot of my family in Asia, they were like, "Oh, well, we've kind of seen this before." So I think that's also why they took it so seriously from the
Mm,
beginning. They're like, "Oh, we know where this is going, or we know where this can go, so we're just gonna shut everything down now." Or yeah, and just start taking it seriously. So yeah, because I remember I was in Taiwan at the end of last December, December 2019, and then left at the very beginning of January 2020. And so that's when the virus first was starting in Wuhan.
yeah.
And I remember seeing the news and like not thinking it was going to be anything because flus come out every year, and um it would by the time but at that time Taiwan was already sending people to um, start checking people coming in from Wuhan and all
Mm,
of that. But I didn't think it was anything too big at the time. I don't think anybody realized how big it was going to be until, a few weeks after we left Taiwan and I saw the news start to come out of China, and I was like, oh, so that got worse than I expected. And then, it starts spreading, and I'm like, oh, that's really a lot worse than what I
mhm.
expected.
And here we are. Here we
And here
are.
we are. On the bright side, I guess. Taiwan's doing fine.
Yeah,
Like,
I saw that. Like, how both
Taiwan is,
countries recovered so quickly.
yeah, and like even even Japan and South Korea and China, they've recovered so impressively well,
Yeah.
given proximity and population density. They really, um, even though having big spikes at certain points, it really have to applaud them on how they handled it, like as a whole.
Yeah, like I feel like
Really have to hand it to them.
we could learn from their examples.
Yeah. I think we can learn from pretty much anybody's examples right now, other than our own. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree. I definitely agree. I haven't gotten like too political on this channel yet, but hopefully it's obvious.
yeah, we don't have to get into the political parts of it, but I do think it's objective to say that we as a country have not handled it well, at least by comparison. I think that's pretty objective.
I agree.
We can There are so many reasons that we can get into, but
If you want to, you
objectively,
can.
I mean, oh, I could go on for hours on that. So probably not for this. We can get into it later, but
Yeah, okay.
just from a number standpoint, we're not doing so hot, and we haven't been doing very hot since January. So, but I'm actually curious to hear from you, if during all of this you have felt any forms of discrimination as a fellow Asian woman.
Oh. Well, no one's like spat on me or done anything like
Mm,
that. I did get
mhm.
catcalled the other day though, but oh well.
I feel like that
But
just comes with being a woman sometimes.
I know, and it was like I was
Yeah.
wearing like jeans, a hoodie. My hair was like in a messy bun. I didn't wash my hair that day, and I was just like wearing these lovely glasses. And I just like I see this car moving next to me at a stoplight, and I'm like, okay, it's just weirdos dancing to the radio. And then all of a sudden I hear like a hey, and I was like,
Oh wow.
we're just not gonna look over. But yeah, I feel like nothing too obvious. I feel like I do get looks sometimes, but I don't want to
Hmm.
like jump to conclusions and
Conclusions.
assume that they're
Yeah.
just being like racist. Like maybe they
Yeah.
just happen to make eye contact and I walked by and we made eye contact. But I
Mhm.
remember my husband and I quarantined with our in-laws for like two
Mhm.
months. And I remember on the airplane ride there, it was right when everything started to hit the fan.
Mhm.
And I had allergies.
Oh
And
no.
I did have a mask. I didn't cough or
Yeah.
anything. But then at one
Uh-huh.
point during the plane ride, I sneezed.
Oh
And
no.
this guy in front of me, like, he jumped, turned around, looked at me, and his eyes were huge. He looked afraid. And I was just like, it's
Oh
gonna be
no.
okay. So that's the biggest thing I can think of. But yeah, I get
Yeah.
weird looks and just like when I see you. And I actually was like born in Wuhan, so I'm like, great.
Yeah. It's like wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah. Like I thought it was like a joke when someone's like, "Yeah, it's the Wuhan virus," and I was like, "Yeah, right. You're only saying that because I was born there." And they're like, "Katie, no," and I was like,
No, like it's actually from
"Oh,
there.
oh,
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it was really interesting because earlier on, I don't think a lot of people realize how big Wuhan is. Because we were like, oh, it's only at the very, very early stages, they're like, oh, it's really only contained to like this one city. And I was like, but do you understand that that city is like the population of Chicago and New York combined?
oh,
Like, do you
I
realize?
didn't even know that.
Do you,
Wow."
yeah, Wuhan's huge. It is a huge city, and they're not even the largest city in China. So I was, starting to realize, I don't think people are understanding how big this is and what this means because China is already a very populous country. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, that's that's still not good, even though it's contained to
Yeah.
one city.
Oh.
Like it is huge. So
Yeah, I feel like people think it's like a small little country town or something like that. It's like not
yeah,
that many
no,
people.
no,
What?
I'm like, okay, comparatively to China, maybe it's considered like a second. It is considered like a second tier city. So like I don't know. I feel like in the states, for example, San Francisco would be considered second tier city or something like that. I'm like, okay, yes, but there's a huge discrepancy in population between San Francisco.
Mm. Yeah, I feel like maybe
So
people forget that China at one point had to get rid of the daughters because there were so many people.
yeah, population is huge.
Oh,
Like, so
oh.
yeah.
Context, everybody. Context.
Are we jumping into that? Are we digging deep?
What?
Are we talking about your childhood traumas now?
Oh, no context. Like, know the city, know the population in comparison. Are we? Childhood traumas. I got my shiner. If we want to jump into that. But what about
I mean,
you?
that's up to you.
We can. I'm down. I want this to be like authentic conversations. Obviously, we're not giving away social security numbers, so if you're here for that,
No.
but but before that, like, have you experienced like any discrimination yourself?
Luckily, not so much. But I did find myself becoming much more aware of my Asianness, and
Yes.
that was something that I didn't expect. I didn't grow up in a particularly ethnically diverse area, but I didn't really feel that when I was growing up as much anyways. And I went to an area that was very, very Asian heavy, and you could say I got used to that, but I would still come home fairly often, and so I don't think I necessarily ever forgot the fact that I came from a very ethnically homogenous area, but this time around with coronavirus, I got so self-conscious, and I felt like
Mm.
anytime anybody spent even a second longer looking at me, I felt like, what do they think? And I remember actually, I had a friend's wedding, a very close friend's wedding, in April,
Oh yeah, I
and
remember this.
yeah, and it was really challenging for me to make. I ended up not going to the wedding, even though she is one of my closest friends, and it was an extremely hard decision to make, and we had a very serious talk about it too. But I just didn't know how to deal with it. I was so self-conscious about what people would think. I knew that I was going to be the only woman of color at the wedding,
Mm.
because they already made it that just very close family and friends were going to be there, and eventually I think on the day of it was really just family even. So the list got so narrowed down. I knew that I was going to be the only woman of color there, and especially as a Chinese person, as cases were growing rampantly in our area, I did not have the ability to show up. And I don't know. Luckily, she understood where I was coming from, and I was still able to FaceTime into the wedding and get all prepped up with her beforehand and watch it via Facebook Live. But yeah, that was really hard to sit and think about. Like I've never had to think about that before, of how do people see me and what are they going to think? Because I was so worried that God forbid something happened, people got sick at that wedding. I didn't want to be in a position where other people thought, where first I would question, what they would think.
Yeah.
I feel like even the most progressive of people, I feel like there would be even just a split second in their mind thinking about like, oh, was it her?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I couldn't deal with that, and so I didn't go physically.
Mm. Well, I think I told you this then, but I feel like that is like very understandable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I could definitely relate, especially just even going grocery shopping if you notice
Mm-hmm.
someone looking at you, or even
Mm-hmm.
like at a can't remember where I was, but I did notice this older lady like looking at me, and every time I seemed to look up, she was still looking and looked like not
Mm-hmm.
impressed. And I was like, okay, or kind of like a "why are you here" kind of thing. So that does
Yeah.
happen every once in a while. But it's like it's
Mm-hmm.
very interesting because, like you, I don't think I've had to deal with that until now.
Mm-hmm.
But like I think earlier when you mentioned at the beginning of this interview, you're talking about how in starting March and April with all the protests and BLM that and the movements, I feel
Mm-hmm.
like it has been like kind of humbling to realize, oh, this is probably what they face
People think all
on a
the
daily
time.
basis. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was definitely one of those moments where I had like this little bit of um personal experience. It doesn't compare at all, but
No.
that like split moment of like, oh, this must be how a lot of darker skin, even darker skinned Asians. I think that's something
Yeah.
that I had to also think about really hard for the first time. Is like there is so much that comes with being East Asian versus any other Asian, and then other groups. And I think especially when the virus happened, I there was a lot of talk amongst East Asian populations and East Asian groups of where East Asians are on the spectrum of race and privilege,
Mm-hmm.
and that was an interesting conversation to have. And then of course we have Black Lives Matter hit at the end of June, and I was like, oh my god, this is just talk about being the conversation of the year of just
Mm-hmm.
having, and I don't know, and also having to have conversations with other East Asians, and about where we sit, because I think my parents, I can proudly say that they are for the Black Lives Matter movement, and they see the differences and discrepancies. But I know that there are people in my community who, especially who are immigrants themselves, they're like, well, we're immigrants, and um, maybe didn't have the level of sympathy I hoped they would have for a lot of our Black brothers and sisters.
Mm-hmm.
But they were saying we're also minorities, but we don't have this issue, like they blah blah blah. And they just didn't sympathize, and for the same reason they're like, we're in the same boat. And I was like, actually you're not.
We're
We're
not.
really not in the
We're
same boat.
not.
Yeah, I was like, they I this is, and it doesn't discredit the difficulties that they had as immigrants, and whatever situations that they were coming from in their home countries. But at the same time, it doesn't compare to
No, it
hundreds
doesn't.
of years of built-in systemic racism. And I also think it really had to spark a lot of conversation amongst Asian communities with colorism in their own communities too. So it sparked a lot of conversations. I hope it continues going. I think
Yeah.
I
That's
think these are important things that I had never needed or thought to have these conversations with my parents, with my aunties, uncles, and stuff like that. So it's been really wonderful to have that chance to talk about it. And I think even for a lot of corporations as well to talk about this in their workplaces. This is, I think, such a
Mm,
great time.
yeah.
Um, I don't know. I don't know if your universities have made it a big deal, but my hometown university, they had for the first time these conversations about racism on campus and experiences of racism on campus, and it was horrific because I've grown up here my entire life. I didn't go to that institution, but that's been so central to my upbringing. And then to hear about all of these instances, like, oh my god! And it wasn't just students; it was faculty as well. Amongst faculty, how faculty have felt treated by other faculty members, by the administration as a whole, and all of that. It's just been really eye opening, and I hope that they continue having these conversations.
Hmm. I'm actually not sure how much my university has implemented these new realities. I
Hmm.
do know they have like a virtual diversity training.
Hmm.
Um, but that being said, I feel like I'm not the best person to be asked just because I'm not on campus that often since I do
Right.
am a commuter.
Hmm.
But whenever I'm on campus, I don't feel any sense of like fear, if you know what I mean, because it
Hmm.
seems like a very diverse group. But I am like in the music building, so naturally that is going to be a
Hmm.
little bit more diverse. But
Hmm.
yeah, I can. The town I live in is definitely more red.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like I haven't noticed any like signs for like events on having these talks, but it
Hmm.
doesn't seem like they're closed off to it either.
Yeah. I don't know. It's been really interesting. And then I was in a Greek organization all through college too. So
This is actually four
um,
woods.
not quite, not quite. But I was in a Greek organization in college, and a lot of these talks stem back, or will be talked about in the context of Greek systems, and that's been an interesting crossroads for me to be at too in these conversations because I I don't know. As much as I enjoyed my time in a Greek organization, and I was a leader in a Greek organization, so as much as I have gotten so much out of my experience and how much I enjoyed my experience, I also can't disagree with anything that people have said
Hmm.
about how it is extremely exclusive, or at least historically has been exclusive, and how it continues to be a very um, it still often doesn't reflect campus demographics, even whether that's ethnically, socioeconomically, and that I would say most Greek organizations do not mirror the demographics of their university, and that is not an exception for the university that I was at. I am happy that my particular chapter, I did feel like we were the closest
Hmm.
to mirroring campus demographics. And I think that there are a lot of things that we implemented that I'm very proud of. And I do think that we are actively seeking to make Greek life inclusive. But that's not easy to do when the system is not built that way.
Yeah.
And I know that at least my chapter has struggled a lot with competing with other sororities, um, because um, it it's hard to work against the system. It's really
Yeah,
hard.
it really is.
Yeah. And so I don't know. There's the Abolish Greek Life movement has been a big talk as well, linked to the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's a weird intersection for me to be at because on one hand I actually do support a lot of it, um, but at the same time I also don't want to see it go completely purely because of my own experiences with it, that have been luckily very positive. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, it seems like Greek like is something that has so much stigma surrounding it,
Hmm.
regardless of positive experiences that people like you may have. I was never a part of one.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think it's just like how do you I don't know, how do you like change something without getting rid of it? How do you keep the
Yeah.
good but throw out the not so good parts? I
Yeah. And
eloquently just said.
it is, and it's so hard, and it's the Greek system is not obviously not the only thing that is going through that right now, but yeah, it's really, really hard to do that because I think at least for sororities, so much of prestige is based off of how the game has worked and how well you play in the current game.
Mm,
And so trying to go against that is challenging because until everyone follows you, you're the odd one out
mm,
and no one wants to be a part of it. Even if by name, even if people say that they want to do it, is or they support what you're doing, it's hard because I think in a lot of cases, it's you need that number, you need that support, and when you're not getting it because of whether that's politics or other reasons, it's
mm,
challenging, and
mm-hmm.
so I have a lot of sympathy for the sororities and fraternities that are trying to make a change in the Greek system, but until their internationals gets on board, until they actually take it seriously, it's not something that can be done. And if it doesn't get done in time, then if that means having to basically shut it down, start over, that's I'm wondering if that's something that is in the future.
I don't know. I feel like I'm a lot of that also applies to the handling of the virus. To be
Yeah.
honest, I'm just like so many
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there are similar conversations in classical music as well.
Oh yeah.
You have classical music that's so deeply rooted in money and power. I think throughout
Mm-hmm.
history, where art is, there's always money involved.
Yep, yep. There's usually some wealthy patron who
hmm
is actually
Yeah,
interested in the
and
real.
I think it's also been. I've been working in arts administration for the past couple of years too. A big challenge in class for classical arts, whether it's classical music, theater, whatever, is getting people in the seats and getting people interested. Um, like no, like everyday people, not just the fancy people that can, you know, afford to go to the opera all the time. It's expensive. It's expensive
Mm-hmm.
to go to these places, and I think a lot of times there's a lot of intimidation because if someone doesn't know exactly what they're talking about, they don't really want to go into that space because it's filled. A lot of the time, it is filled with people that study music, study art, whatever, and people who have the opportunity had some degree of wealth and privilege growing up,
For
and
sure.
so I think it's also on classical arts organizations to really figure out how they're gonna handle that because this has been going on for decades. It's not new.
Nope, not at all.
The struggle of getting young people interested, the struggle of getting regular people who haven't studied classical music or classical arts interested. That's really hard, and
Yeah,
you know that on top of I do think it goes hand in hand too with diversifying
yeah.
who's programmed and what is programmed as
Or
well as
even
who's
what's
who's playing.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like what does the orchestra look like?
Yeah. Yeah. And I was like, that definitely doesn't mirror demographics of any city, I'll tell you that. Like,
Nope, not at all.
no, I mean, I feel like this is another weird spot where, like, yeah, for East Asians, we're used to seeing each other playing piano, violin, and
Oh
whatnot.
yeah.
The solo instruments, violin, piano, cello, flute. Outside of that, I'm just like, oh, I actually don't know much. Don't know
Yeah,
many.
right.
Um.
Yeah, I feel like you'd
So
expect to see like Asians and Caucasians on stage. And
yeah,
if I think of any concert I've been to, I can't name that many black people I've seen play of them or Hispanics or people like that.
yeah,
I just don't
and
remember. Or maybe they weren't there.
yeah, and that's when you think about it, you're like, that's kind of messed up.
Yeah.
But so much of that comes from who had access,
Yeah.
growing up. And I think um, especially for people who are trained classically and instruments that are more specifically for classical music. So strings are pretty common
Mm.
for that. I feel like there are some other instruments that you don't have to necessarily be engaged in the classical arts to play. So I feel like a lot of brass is a bit more accessible. But especially for strings, you start so young.
Yeah, no.
Typically,
How
you
old were you
start
when
so
you
young.
started?
I started late. I started at 11.
Yeah, I started at 11 too. So,
Yeah, it's hard, and I felt like most of my peers started when they were at most 6.
yeah, I know. We had
Yeah,
childhoods for the most part.
yeah, yeah, and so it, it's. I feel like in the strings, especially, it is hard to start later and get to the same level as a lot of other people. Um, and because strings is traditionally very, very classical, you don't
Oh,
see too
yeah.
much of you don't see too much of that in any other music genre. So it's not exactly accessible to a lot of people in terms of when you start learning, and even like the kind of music you play.
Yeah.
And string instruments especially are very pricey. Yeah,
Yeah, for
so it's
sure.
it's a whole thing. It's been really enjoyable conversation actually to have with other musicians.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how even when if you talk about like a fiddle player, which is the same thing as a violin, guys, just so you know. But I feel like I don't know, a lot of the people who are classical musicians, at least the ones I've met, a lot of them there is a stigma to that too, or even improvisation. But in reality,
Hmm.
improvisation, for example, is so difficult.
It's so hard. I
Yeah.
have so much respect for I immediately think of jazz players when I think of improvisation. I'm like,
Yeah.
I have so much respect for jazz players because if you ask me to improv anything on the violin, like
Yeah.
twinkle, like
Right?
you know, there's like nothing I can improv on that. Obviously, I'm not a professional, but like,
No, I feel like a lot of classical musicians who are professionals can't do it. Because I took like improvisation lessons one of my last years at my undergrad institution.
mhm.
And dude, it's so hard. It's like you're totally
Yeah,
learning. It's like the same instrument, but it's a totally new instrument. And so I feel like when
yeah,
people look down on like fiddlers or non classical musicians, it's like you could actually be learning something.
yeah. No, exactly. And they get looked down upon because it's like, oh, it's not the classical form. And why is the classical form so important? And it's like, well, because that's what was funded to be made. You
Yeah.
know, like, oh, you have a wealthy patron. They don't care as much about like your fiddle music, your bluegrass music, but yeah, it's very different. What's played in the courts, what's played at church,
Right? Oh my
not the same as
gosh.
what's played by the fire or in your own communities. It's not the same. So
Well,
yeah, it's
maybe
very
they should
interesting.
normalize it. They should start playing new kinds of music that don't. I don't know. I think a lot needs to change in many different areas of
Yeah,
life.
yeah, and I think it's on arts organizations especially to be programming music that more people can access, because yeah, I love Brahms and Beethoven and I don't knock any of that, but I grew up being trained in that and I grew up listening to that, but that's not the case for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So but so much of I think what a lot of classical arts organizations, they get stuck in wanting to honor that, and I think that's fine. It's I totally get it. It's great music, but to be so stuck in it means shutting out a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so I think that there needs to be a lot that's changed, especially when I think about at least Asian composers and Asian instrumentalists. I'm like, it's not like there's a shortage of music, of classically written music, you know, um, that ties in the folk songs and folk cultures of other non-European um, uh, cultures, and so, but those don't get programmed. They're not, at least
No.
not outside of Asia. Um, and access is part of it. Like, yeah, the physical accessing of sheet music is difficult, and the rights, but at the same time, I'm like, no, I mean, you should be wanting to capture more people.
Yeah.
And that was a conversation I'd recently been having with uh, a couple arts administration people in my area of having, I don't know, it's this weird moment of like having to try to convince somebody that, at least in this case, I was advocating for more Asian music and
Mm.
engaging the Asian populations in this area, of having to convince someone that that is worthy of their time and of their energy and of their money to engage the Asian population. And it was a very powerful thing for me, but at the same time, I was just so disappointed because I was like, I have to make such a strong case for this, when I would hope that that's any organization would want to do what they can to loop in, you know, everybody that makes up their community.
But then
And
again, it's not where the money is it?
it's not,
Yeah.
it's not, and that's the problem. Where some people have been more receptive of it than others, but yeah, having to try really hard and go in and being like, no, this is why you should care.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is part of it, of like, oh, well, so many Asians are in our youth orchestras and whatnot. And so I don't know if that's the reason, but I wonder if that's part of why they necessarily don't think that we're a group that needs to be brought in, because maybe we're already in. But you know, I don't know if you ever felt this, but growing up, as much as I loved playing classical music, it's such a different experience when you're able to hear um, music of your own culture played.
Mm.
And so for me, that was like the Butterfly Lovers Concerto is a big one for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's it's something that I don't think you always realize until you hear it. And a lot of I get to hear a lot of performances out of Asia as well, and there will be Asian composers who have arranged folk songs in a way that is matches more of the classical form. And I think it's important to have that visibility there, and to know
Yeah.
that it's not just the people playing the music, it's also the music itself.
Yeah. I feel like that also brings it back to like when we were talking about how even just the musicians on the stage, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to bring more diverse audiences, it's
Mm-hmm.
like if you don't see yourself on the stage, if you don't listen to music being played by you or people like you probably don't feel welcome.
No,
So
yeah, I can't.
why would you want to be a part of that? It's like, oh, they clearly don't
Right,
want me here.
right, right. Because um, I can't imagine what it must feel like to try to break into try to be in classical music and not see yourself. Because I always had the privilege of being able to see people like me in
Yeah.
classical music. Because from my teachers, my teachers were Asian, and the lot of instrumentalists I looked up to were Asian. There wasn't a shortage of them, but I can't imagine what it feels like
Yeah.
um,
It's actually
to
this.
never see people like you.
Yeah. I feel
Yeah.
like it's kind of like tying it back to what we were talking about earlier is like we do have
Hmm.
some privilege as like Asian women because
Hmm.
I feel like feel free to disagree with me, but my own
Hmm.
experience, I feel like just on the ladder of what people of other races have had to go through in terms of like
Hmm.
racism, discrimination, I feel like we're not as high up. And I feel like even if there are stereotypes, it's usually ones that can be laughed at if we let it go. Like, oh, you must be really smart. You must play the
Hmm.
piano. You must play the violin. Are you one of those
Yeah.
prodigies? It's like those usually don't get us like lynched or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I totally agree that there. I don't completely agree with certain parts of this, but there are a lot of people who say that being East Asian, being light skinned Asian, is like almost being white, and I'm like, okay, there's some. I don't disagree with that, because I do think by comparison, yes, comparison to a lot of other minority groups, I do think that as light skinned Asians, we're probably the closest to those privileges. That doesn't equate. That doesn't mean that we're the same. And I think if anything, coronavirus has
Yeah.
solidified that we are not anywhere near where white people are. But at least by comparison, there's a lot of privilege there that we have. Where yeah. No, I've always gotten the benefit of teachers thinking I was super smart for no reason other than I look like this.
Like well behaved. Like, oh, you won't be one of the troublemakers. I've gotten that a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, that ended up being relatively positive because I happened to fall into a lot of those stereotypes. I played piano, I played violin, I got decent grades, and I was pretty shy. So
Same.
yeah, so like I fit into a lot of those, and that benefited me a lot. Um, and I cannot imagine what it's like because I got so lucky that somehow I fit into this, and it ended up benefiting me so much. But I also saw what it meant when there were other Asian students that didn't fit that. Whether that was they didn't fit the like you're very docile and shy and smart. Whether it's people that didn't fit that, or people who didn't necessarily get strong grades. Um, I saw what that also meant for some people and how detrimental that was to their sense of self, even. And I mean, a lot of the ones I saw there, they're a little bit older than I am, so I hope that they have come to terms with that. But whenever I saw them, I know that was very challenging for them.
Mm.
Um, so, and that's just talking about how it can be hurtful amongst other East Asians. When Southeast Asians or South Asians, they go through that same thing of like, oh, you must be so smart. They fall into that same category, but in terms of what people think about them because they're Asian, but it's not a fair comparison at all.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, there's so many we can get so deep into that, but,
Oh, we
but
totally
yeah,
could. Like, I honestly want to bring you back, like, tomorrow or next week, and we can keep doing talks.
yeah, because I don't know, it must be very very different, and such a strange experience because it's not the same when, for example, my parents they came for graduate school, which means they had the means of getting an education
Mm-hmm.
before they came here, and then they came here and they got advanced degrees. That's such a different experience than, for example, someone who immigrated because they were coming from a war torn country. That's not the
Yeah.
same. You
Yeah.
cannot equate that. And so whether or not their children or even they themselves eventually get to the same degree of quote unquote success, however you want to measure that, you can't compare the two experiences.
No.
They're just completely different.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of the problems we see are because of, like, trying to standardize everything. Or, like,
Mm-hmm.
when you were born, because of the way you look.
Mm-hmm.
Society has these expectations of what you're supposed to look like, what you're supposed to do, based
Mm-hmm.
purely on, oh, clearly you're Asian or you're
Yeah.
black, so we expect you to do these or not fulfill these.
Right. Because stereotyping is, I don't think it's in and of itself bad because that's how we remember things. That's how our brain works. We have to categorize
Yeah.
um, people. That's just how our brains work. The problem is when we aren't able to see past it, I think.
Yes.
And so, I don't think that the stereotyping itself is bad because we have to do that. Um,
Yeah.
but it's when we don't recognize it and aren't able to look past it that it becomes such a big problem.
Exactly. Well said.
Mm-hmm.
No, I feel like it does come, like, as a survival instinct in a way. Like, even
Mm-hmm.
when we met, I feel like the reason we kind of started talking, one is because of that awful duet we had to play. We were grouped together. But, like, when we first, like,
Yeah.
got into the room, I think you said you saw me and felt a little bit more comfortable because there's familiarity there. You
Mm-hmm.
see, like, a camaraderie.
Yeah.
That's
And
not a
I
bad
think a lot.
thing.
No. And it's really interesting thinking about, yeah, as a child, especially like seeing any other Asian person was like, we are automatically friends until otherwise. Like, so it was really interesting because at least that was my experience growing up. I don't know if other people had similar things, but for me, I was like, oh, yeah, it was just kind of like an unspoken thing. Like, if you saw any other Asian, like, we were just like, we got each other. We don't know each other, but we got each other.
Yeah, or, like, for me, I didn't grow up. I didn't grow up in a town
uh,
with many Asians. There were, like, four of
mm-hmm,
us at my high
mm-hmm,
school, and so people just
mm-hmm.
assumed we were related or dating, which is disgusting.
Yeah,
But, like, when I went
yeah,
to the music camp where I met you and I saw some of the Asians, I hung out with you guys and I was like, this is so cool. You're just like people like me. And I was like 16. I don't think that's a bad thing. And even
Mm-hmm.
now, living in like more diverse places or universities with people from
Mm-hmm.
around the world, like
Mm-hmm.
even when I started my graduate program, I do see, I noticed that there's an Asian nod, kind of like you see another Asian, you're like, hey.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's relatively common in places where there aren't as many. That was actually a big shock for me when I first moved to California, and everybody was Asian, and so I don't know. It was. I had this weird feeling of like,
You're the
okay,
norm. Sorry.
I know. I was like, oh my god, I'm part of a majority. It's such a strange feeling because I was like, there's no such thing as like you see another Asian, therefore you're friends. Like you're just you, and that was so weird.
Did it feel almost, man, I can't think of the word right now. Did it feel freeing in a way? Would you
um,
say? Or was it just like odd because it's never been like that?
it was more odd. I didn't necessarily feel like it was more or less freeing. Um, but yeah, it was so odd because the only other time I experienced that was in Asia, you know. But you bet that you expect that because you know you're in Asia. But you know, when I was in school, I was like, this is clearly the United States. I you know, and I'm it's not that I should say everybody's Asian, but you know, at least my university was majority Asian.
Ah,
Like
okay.
it was like 36% or something, like something really high. Um, and also, but still having a mix of you know Caucasian, other people with mixed ethnicities, Latina, black as well. And so you know, so it wasn't quite as homogenous as when you're in Asia, but it's I was still like, oh my god, this is such a weird experience. Where you know,
Wow.
I think I didn't realize how much I relied on seeing another Asian and just being like, oh, we're friends until I got to California because I was like,
You got a
yeah,
lot of
no,
friends.
yeah, like,
Hey, so
and
we're
it was
all like in a clique now, guys. All two
yeah, it,
million of us.
yeah, and it was such a strange experience. But you know, that's not to say that you know we didn't end up becoming better friends with certain people because of shared ethnicities and shared experiences. But um, on the surface, I was like, oh my god, this is so different. Yeah,
Wow. Let's see. So it looks like it's already been like a little bit over an hour, and I don't think people
yeah.
want to listen to a 2 hour thing. But I am gonna ask you later if you'd like to come back so we can continue this conversation because
Oh,
I feel
always.
like we're digging into some really cool stuff. But I do want to
Yeah.
ask you one more
Hmm.
question, and it kind
Hmm.
of takes a couple of steps back. But I
Okay.
think you mentioned like how you hope that the conversations about Black Lives Matter continues,
Mm-hmm.
and something I've been noticing is like I feel like I haven't been seeing Breonna Taylor's name as often. I feel like I haven't seen as many like social media posts, and I also feel
Mm-hmm.
like that's something that should be kept alive. It shouldn't just be
Yeah.
like I feel like when people only talk about it because it's convenient for them, that's when it falls. So, what is
Hmm.
your advice for people who might just now be learning about it late in the game or be open to it now, but don't know how to
Hmm.
start doing research? Like, what did you do? What are you doing now, if
Yeah.
anything?
I think you know that's the thing about media that I both love and hate about it is that it's so easy and quick to start a conversation. It's also really it's just as easy and quick to switch to something else.
Yes.
And um, so I do think it's an active effort to keep her name and the other victims of that
Mm-hmm.
similar violence's names going, but not but sorry. And so I think when you're educating yourself, you know, really having to start from the beginning and understanding the like deep underpinnings of it, because I think if you're at least my experience from talking to people who especially are not born and raised in the US and maybe haven't gotten the same depth of American history as I got, um, they like I think for a lot of them they don't understand why it's such a big not why it's a big deal that she was killed, but why this is such an issue
Yeah.
in the United States. And so I think for people, depending on how much they already know about American history and how much they have looked up the topic before, is just really going back and understanding the underpinnings of it And that Black history doesn't start at slavery
No,
either. I
it
think that's a
doesn't.
big thing. Um, and I didn't realize this until I went to California and met so many people who were both, either educated in California or educated in other parts of the world. How inconsistent our education system is, state by state, even, and even within states, how different my history lessons were versus some people that I know in Little Rock or other more rural parts of the state. Um, it's so different, and how that history is framed to you also makes a difference too.
Oh yeah.
Like, for example, I did not learn about the Civil War the same way that my peers in California learned about it. And I won't say one is necessarily better than the other, but you learn two different sides and you
Yeah.
have emphases on different parts of it. And so my advice to people would just to really take that education seriously. And I luckily have friends who identify as Black men and women, and they have been very open and willing to help me locate resources, but that's not their job.
Yeah.
That's not their job to do. I am lucky that they were willing to do that and help me with it. But I think it is on ourselves to look out for things, and if you have the resources, to whether they are people resources or financial resources, whatever it is, to locate as much as you can, and um, ask I ask questions, but educated questions.
Mm.
I think asking questions after you have done your work is important, and I think it's also on everybody to have an open mind too, as people are educating
Mm-hmm.
themselves, because I do think it's also really easy for people who have been educated or have educated themselves on this to be maybe not as patient with people who are just
Mm.
learning. And I think it's important to recognize that everyone's on their own learning curve,
Yeah.
and people have had their different experiences and have to come from different places. And so I think it's important to be able to have civil conversation, civil questioning, and be able to talk about it, and be
Yeah.
accepting of people who are just learning about it. For me, it's like my gut reaction can be like, oh my god, I can't believe you didn't know, but that's not always that person's fault that they don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So being open-minded too, as people who have been educating themselves or have those lived experiences, to also be open-minded and welcoming of people who are trying to get to that point too.
Yeah, and I think if I remember correctly, I think it might be Yale and UCLA or something that
Mm-hmm.
offer
Mm-hmm.
free like African American history courses, like
Oh,
learning
really?
about
That's
it.
great.
And so
Yeah.
I'll try to link at least one of them below in case anybody's
Mm-hmm.
interested. But
Yeah.
yeah, but thank you so much for taking the hour and a half to talk to me.
Yeah.
And
No,
I'm
thank you.
definitely going to bring you back because I feel like we dug into some really interesting stuff and I want to keep talking to you about it.
Yeah. Thank you. This is fun.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm going to stop recording now, guys, with my other smooth transition. All right. Well, thank you again for listening to all of that. I know it was on the longer side. I haven't decided whether I should cap the conversations or not because I don't know. I don't want to interrupt, I don't know, breakthroughs or just good conversations because I feel like being able to talk to friends is so important these days. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. And once again, if you have any requests or ideas or stuff you want me to ask my friends about, feel free to comment below and have a lovely rest of the day.